My name is Dr. Monica Barratt. I'm a research fellow at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre at the University of New South Wales. And I've been doing research over the past couple of years into the online drug marketplaces in the darknet using Tor and Bitcoin as technologies to enable illicit drug transactions. So that's been my focus, one of my focuses. So SilkRoad was essentially the original, the first marketplace that we became aware of that was using both Tor and Bitcoin. So Tor enabling anonymity between IP addresses and Bitcoin, as we know. So SilkRoad was the FBI brought down SilkRoad last October. So that marketplace was around and operating for nearly 3 years. And in its place, a number of other marketplaces have come forward. Some of those use Bitcoin, others use alternative cryptocurrencies as well. So it certainly hasn't stopped the trading of illicit drugs online. That's just simply moved to different parts of different marketplaces. So in 2012, we did a global survey of drug users. It's called the Global Drug Survey, and we had over 20,000 people respond to that. And within that, we asked people who normally use drugs. We said, did you use the SilkRoad to buy drugs? So we had a proportion of people that said they had. But what was interesting was we also asked people that knew about the SilkRoad but had not used it to buy drugs. Why didn't they use it? And one of the reasons was because Bitcoin was too difficult to get. And this wasn't the main reason, but it was one of those reasons that people gave. And I think at this time it was harder to get Bitcoin. This was back in 2012. There were less available opportunities to buy it. And of course, in this particular situation, these people wanted to buy Bitcoin anonymously. So it may have been easy enough for them to obtain Bitcoin, but in a way, they wanted to do so in a way where they couldn't be traced. So that was, I guess, a constraint for some of those people. It was a marketplace for, and most of the items were illicit items, but there were other things on there: sunglasses, clothing. There are also digital goods, gaming coupons, that kind of thing. So I wanted to try and test out Bitcoin myself, being a researcher that was interested in Bitcoin. So I went through the whole process, and instead of buying drugs, I bought some sunglasses, and that arrived for me in the post from a package from China, and it had gone through customs, and it did still arrive at my doorstep. So that was sort of the process that people trying to buy drugs would have gone through, and they would have been sort of nervously waiting at their post box to see whether the item had actually come. So we've done some qualitative interviews, so in-depth interviews with people who used SilkRoad to buy drugs, and the majority of them had a high level of technical expertise. So for those people, this wasn't such a problem. They had enough, I guess, knowledge or connections to work it through. But some other people, and I guess the much larger cohort that have never used those technologies, find it difficult and confusing. And I think, building that gap is a difficult one to get through until the technology becomes really easy to use. So certainly in 2012, I understood through the interviews that people would need to, say, go down to their NAB or Commonwealth with some cash and sort of deposit it there, and then some Bitcoin would arrive at their address. This was all very sort of, I guess, clunky and difficult to do. But they did that, and they managed to get Bitcoin that way. But these days, I'd imagine there'd be some different ways of accessing it in Australia. It's hard to know in our field what the prevalence of use of online drug marketplaces is. It's very difficult for drug researchers to actually know categorically what the prevalence of particular drugs are in the community. We have a lot of problems with measurement. People obviously would like to keep that sort of information private. So we do have issues there. But even if it is just a fringe proportion of drug users that are using the site, it may have broader implications. For example, some of the research indicates that dealers are using SilkRoad to supply them, and they would then on-sell those drugs in a more traditional way. So even if a small proportion of users were using the site, it may still influence the market more broadly. But what we do know from the research that NDUC has done tracking the different websites and what they sell is that when SilkRoad was brought down, a large number of websites in the next couple of months made themselves available. Some of them crashed, some of them didn't last very long, others have maintained. So I guess out of that, we had a market winner that was there, and then now it's all sort of spread out into different markets. What will happen next is unclear. We can look at what some of the drug users themselves have said in interviews with us, where that they tend to say that they feel it's reduced the chances of violence for them. But it is difficult to measure something like that, and it's not something we can categorically comment on. There is a concern that it might be the case that new drug users, say teens or whatnot, might decide to use one of these sites. But I guess what we've found is that there are some barriers to entry. It's not as simple as just clicking a button, which is often the way it's been portrayed by the mainstream media, that you just go, you click a couple of buttons, put drugs in your cart, check out, and it's done. There is a lot more to it than that for the person that chooses to buy, in that they have to think carefully about what name to use, what address to use, how to obtain the money in a way that doesn't sink back to them. So, of course, it could be the case that there are new users. It's not this sort of simple thing that you can do. So it's interesting that it has often been portrayed in this sense as anonymous. So when I've done mainstream media on SilkRoad, they've tended to wash over that and say, well, this is an anonymous currency. And from what I understand, that's not the case. However, of course, there are the Bitcoin tumblers. So there do seem to be ways where you can make it harder to discover your identity, but that doesn't mean that it is truly anonymous. So it is one of those interesting differences of perception, perhaps, between people that are first using the currency and the experts who would say, well, no, it's not anonymous. Thus far, I don't know whether there have been people prosecuted based solely on evidence from Bitcoin, and that would be, I guess, something worth looking into. So we published a paper in the journal Addiction earlier this year, and so that was about from the Global Drug Survey. So we had over 1,000 drug users who had used SilkRoad to purchase drugs, and what we found was that the majority of those people were male. The majority of them were in their sort of early 20s, so that was around the group. We were looking specifically at English-speaking backgrounds, so that was all we captured. And the majority of those people were buying traditionally illicit drugs, ecstasy, cannabis, those sorts of drugs. There were also some people buying the newer psychoactives, so say 2CB and other, I guess there was one called 25I-N-Bone, which was particularly popular. So this group, the main reasons why they use SilkRoad were actually quite congruent with the reasons why people use e-commerce more generally. So they were specifically interested in the convenience, greater range, better quality, the capacity to rate vendors. So these things, you could apply that to eBay or any other Amazon, that kind of thing. So it was less about drugs per se and more about e-commerce, I think, in the end. Although there was, I think you mentioned earlier, this idea of reducing violence. People did also say that they felt more comfortable buying online, and obviously it's more convenient for them, and they did feel more anonymous. That was there as well. So all those reasons fed into why they chose to use SilkRoad rather than, I guess, the face-to-face dealing relationships that it replaced. So the ratings of buyers and sellers, being able to apply what we use in so many e-commerce situations these days to evaluate vendors is something that people were really excited about. And not only were they making those ratings, it was also the forums, the online communities that were part of SilkRoad, where they were able to put threads up about a particular vendor, their products, that kind of thing. So I think that is particularly important. And obviously there have been some scams that have occurred over this course of events where vendors have taken a large amount of money and not provided any of the product and have never been found again. So there is that concern, I think, amongst buyers, anyone in this marketplace, that they could find that they've paid for something they'll never receive. There is that problem. But you know, that's not completely gotten around through these ratings. Because people they could get really good ratings, like some of these people did, and then they could choose to leave. Obviously, there are still informal ratings in the face-to-face world. As you would know, people would tell people, don't trust that guy there. There is that, but it's not accessible to a stranger. So if someone who's completely disconnected from a face-to-face or I guess a local network of drugs comes to SilkRoad, they don't know anybody else, they can look at all of the vendor ratings and they can read up about that vendor. That kind of research that is so commonplace buying, you know, white goods or technology. You know, before we buy a new computer, we're going to look at all the ratings and all the reviews, and we're going to think about that. That is applying that to someone's cocaine or someone's methamphetamine. Yeah, so that was important to the people that we surveyed. So obviously Bitcoin have been used to purchase drugs through the SilkRoad, but this is the same as the US dollar, the AU dollar, and all of the other currencies that we're familiar with.